You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. The future of Seattle City Light might run through Oregon. The city has contracted 2 solar fields in central Oregon in an effort to meet surging demand for electricity in the city. It's estimated that by 2033, the utility will need to about double its current production in order to keep up. For the first time, the public utility needs to look beyond hydropower to meet that need. But where that new power will come from is still unclear. David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times and friend of the show here on Soundside, is back. Thank you so much, David. And this is a really gorgeous spread in the Seattle Times with all the photography and everything. I encourage folks to check it out. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So you tweeted that you wanted to do something different here with this reporting on the solar projects in Oregon. You know, deserts in Oregon are a little different than the halls of, city council chambers. What brought you to the Oregon desert? What drew you to this story?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to kind of get caught up in the daily current of Seattle city politics, which focus on rightfully homelessness, housing, public safety, but there is this entire multi-billion-dollar function of Seattle government, which is to keep the lights on and to give you water and to pick up your garbage. And it's sort of one of those things where if it's working well, we don't think about it very much. But I like to think about it a lot because particularly with City Light, there's just a lot of really complicated calculations that go into providing enough electricity for Seattle for the many years to come, and doing so in a way that is clean and is not burning fossil fuels. And so this has been kind of in my back pocket for a long time. And we're at a little bit of a lull between the primary election and the general election. It felt like a good opportunity to explore what I think is a complicated and fascinating issue.
So the past 5 years have marked this major shift for Seattle City Light. You report on the fact that there's been drought, extreme weather. These have all driven the utility to have to rush to meet increased demand for electricity. Walk us through this demand picture. How has City Light's power needs changed over the past 5-6 years?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In 2018, all of City Light's models were actually showing the opposite problem, that demand was cratering. And the reason for that is because the city was doing a really good job at meeting its energy goals. Buildings were becoming more efficient, and they just did not need to supply as much power to the city as they thought. And that was actually going to be a problem for City Light because their rate base was starting to dry up. So they were looking at a revenue shortfall. But what they did not predict at the time would be the rise of electric cars, the rise of data centers, and, just sort of general growth in the city of Seattle. And the pandemic, that required more electricity at home. And so suddenly, whereas in 2018, they thought that their problem was there wasn't going to be enough demand, all of these factors flip that on its head. So now Seattle is actually consuming more electricity than it ever has. And if, electric car adoption and the electrification of, say, ferries and buses and all these things continue to on the trend that they're on right now, they're saying that by, as you mentioned, 2033, they're going to need something like 1,800 new megawatts, which in perspective is about what the output is today. So we're talking about doubling the amount of electricity that they need to create. The real challenge here is that is happening at the same time as there's drought and extreme weather events. So the amount of output coming from the dams is less than it used to be. And whenever we have something like a really cold snap or a really hot snap, people collectively are turning on their heats or their ACs at a rate that we've just never seen before, which you can, probably trace back to climate change and any number of things. And so all of that combined means that the flexibility in Seattle City Light system is just much less, and they really need to expand their portfolio of power sources.
It's just mind-blowing that only 7 years ago they were thinking, oh, this demand is dropping, like that this was not projected to be the kind of growth that we're seeing now. Introduce me to these new sun energy projects in the Oregon desert. Where are they exactly, and how did the city decide that they were going to use these solar panels in Oregon to meet the energy needs of the future?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So these 2 solar sites are one is out near Prineville, which is sort of near Bend. Both of them are kind of near Bend, and then the other one south of there in this very remote rural area called Fort Rock. Um, and they were built and leased by this company, New Sun Energy. And the interesting thing about that industry down there is it's not like Seattle City Light comes to them and says, "Hey, we'd like some power," and they say, "Okay," and they go out and find a property owner and build the stuff. They've actually placed their bets on these properties years ago. So this guy, Jake Stevens, who started this company in 2016, came from Arizona to Oregon, sort of anticipating, and this was at a time when demand for this was not high at all, but he was anticipating that there would be demand and that Oregon would be a good place to do it. So basically he was making a pretty big gamble on Oregon as a producer of solar. And what that got him was not only, access to landowners who were willing to lease him high quality sites, but probably most importantly, it got him really early in line to plug into the Bonneville Power Administration, which is has pretty close to a monopoly on all transmission of electricity in the Northwest. And anyone that you talk to in the clean energy world say that is the number one challenge in creating new clean energy sources is you can build the fanciest and nicest project in the world, but most people are just not able to plug it in. They can't get the power from point A to point B. And so it's the folks like Jake and New Sun Energy who basically cut the line, who beat everybody else out to Oregon, that are in a position where they actually can plug in by the end of this year or even early next year in a way that very, very few people can.
Yeah, it has the feel of like prospecting or like finding
Yeah, exactly.
a vein of precious metals or something, that to be hitting this at the right time and to be able to get in line to connect to the grid at the right time. And now demand is huge. David, what do these two projects in Oregon tell you about the strategy that City Light is going to pursue in order to meet demand in the future? I mean, is it going to be solar? I mean, what does it look like going forward?
Yeah, these projects are interesting to me for a few reasons. I mean, first, just the fact of their being new, that this is a kind of they represent a new era for Seattle City. Like they've done a little bit of wind in some places, but really this is this step into the future for Seattle City Light. And I like it because we're not talking about hypotheticals here. They are actually building these projects and creating power. So on the one hand, it's a feel-good story from that perspective. On the other hand, it really brings into sharp relief how hard it is going to be to create 1,800 megawatts. These two projects combined will get the city about 80 megawatts, and they need 1,800. And, everything I just told you, it's taken close to a decade for these projects to get to where they are right now, where they can actually deliver power. And there were probably a few others out there that they could tap, but nowhere near 1,800 megawatts worth of solar. And so the whole story was interesting to me because it's a feel-good story, but also it's just shows that to get from where we are today to where we need to be by 2033, they're going to have to do a lot of advanced planning and a lot of communications with solar providers, wind providers also, though wind also has the same problem as far as being able to plug into Bonneville. Geothermal production, which is you're basically mining the heat out of the earth. Uh, and so, they're not putting all of their chips into the solar basket, in part because they want a diverse stream of sources, but it is a key part of what they're trying to do here. But the question of how much further they can take this beyond their relationship to New Sun and Jake is unclear.
The federal government was behind giving subsidies to a bunch of projects having to do with green energy with the Inflation Reduction Act. But of course, the spending bill that the President Trump championed and Republicans in Congress passed really gutted most of those subsidies. What is the picture now when it comes to any help for getting these projects off the ground? And does the big, beautiful bill change the future of renewables in our area?
Yes, it does change the future of renewables because the number one thing that really City Light is trying to do here is make it so we're not spending exorbitant amounts of money on our electricity, that they can keep rates low. And even with the current subsidies that are in place for clean energy, rates are going to go up. The cost of this electricity is, by definition, higher than a lot of what we've been getting from hydro. So it's going to be more expensive one way or the other. But when the subsidies disappear, those rates are going to go up. The cost of building, say, a solar field is probably going to go up by close to 40%. And so in City Light's quest to provide affordable energy to customers, at least as affordable as they can, that gets a lot harder with those subsidies going away. Um, and then, I mean, I think part of it too, it draws into, brings into focus this problem of connecting into the power grid that we talked about before, because when that bill passed, it kind of put a clock on who could qualify for these clean energy subsidies. And you have to, as a project, show that you are a certain amount into the project or get your project off the ground in order to take advantage of the subsidies. And the fact is, that just isn't really happening right now. There are not really any new projects coming online because people understand that if you try and build something now, you're probably looking at a 10-year wait to plug in your power. And so people are just not really bothering. But because there's not a lot of incentive to start a new project now, they're all going to miss out on the clean subsidies because those are going to expire by the time they actually are doing any development. Um, and so it just is specific to the Northwest. It's a tough situation because maybe in other places you could kind of hurry up and get your project online to take advantage of the subsidies, but that just isn't in the cards for anybody in the Northwest.
Which leads to the situation we're in where there's very few new clean energy projects coming online compared to other states. Like Washington and Oregon are way behind other states in how quickly they're getting projects on because of this bottleneck at Bonneville. David, it really seems like something is going to have to give here, right? We've got this major demand, and that's growing. Restrictions on how quickly we can get power, new sources of power up and running and connected to the grid, not enough time to build out the capacity to meet demand. All of this, as the environment's warming, we get more extreme weather. Again, that changes power demand in and of itself and also supply. As you were researching this story, I mean, what did you think was the most likely thing that was going to give going forward? Like, are we looking at blackouts? Are we looking at brownouts? What sort of predictions did you come to as you were reporting this?
Yeah, the City Light notably did not rule out that there is a future in which we have blackouts and brownouts. They didn't say that is the most likely scenario, and they don't think that they will get there, but it is certainly not an impossibility. I think more likely what's going to happen is things are going to get more expensive. City Light already buys a lot of power from Bonneville's dams on the Columbia River. If they need extra supplemental energy, they go to Bonneville and basically compete on the free market for supplementary power. That they've been doing that for a while. The problem is, though, everybody is doing that now, and they're going to continue to do that. And basically, the entire West Coast is required to use only clean energy. So there's not a lot of options to go to fossil fuels to supplement this. And so I think what's going to happen is as demand, and it's not just going to be Seattle, as demand up and down the West Coast increases and as output decreases, the competition for that supplementary energy from someone like Bonneville is just going to skyrocket. And we've seen glimpses of this already. I think it was 23 or 24 when we had this really intense cold snap. The price of a megawatt hour, which usually hovers around something like $50 to $80, spiked up to $1,000. And so that's sort of the example is we will see these peaks where the competition is so fierce that we're starting to pay, $2,000 a megawatt hour, and then customers are going to have to pay for that. And by the way, we already are. The City Light has already increased rates by 5.5%, which is a pretty steep increase for them historically. And so this is not a hypothetical. We are living this moment right now. I think the changes have been subtle enough that maybe it hasn't really, and our power is generally pretty cheap still, that those rate increases haven't really hurt and really haven't caused too much pain yet. But I think that could change pretty rapidly here in the coming years.
Just before we go, I mean, I know you've been spending a lot of time in the field and in the deserts of Oregon, but you're also a City Hall reporter, and the City Council has a role in managing all of this in the future, of what our energy mix looks like. What are you following as they're looking at addressing this going forward?
Yeah, well, I'll say first, and I mentioned this in the piece, the Energy Committee in the Seattle City Council is famous for being the place where the rookie council member or the disfavored council member is stashed. Right now it is held by council member Alexis Mercedes Rink, who is the most junior member of the council. For years, it was held by Shama Sawant, because the rest of the council, frankly, didn't like her very much, and so they put her on the Energy Committee. It's largely seen as a committee that is runs itself. That the City Light doesn't need as much oversight, but I find that's another reason I find this interesting is it's actually a really complicated moment for Seattle City Light. That's not to question Councilmember Rink's competence at all, but I do kind of question whether this reputation of this committee being reserved for the most junior member, maybe that could change a little bit. But really, I think they're going to have to come up with plans for how much power, for example, is reserved for residents and just kind of people going about their daily lives versus maybe do the big consumers like Amazon, or some of these companies, or there's apparently there is a request for 11 new data centers in Seattle. So do they get a different rate structure? Do they take on a little bit more so that you and I pay a little bit less? I think there's just going to be a lot of interesting conversations about triaging the power that's coming in and who pays more and who pays less.
Wow. And I can see that becoming much more of a political issue as rates continue to increase. David Croman, it's just a really deeply reported and interesting piece. And shout out as well to your photographer, Joe Klein, who got some great shots there of the solar fields in Oregon that Seattle City Light is contracting with. Appreciate your reporting, David, as always. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.